Welcome everyone to the 26th webinar in the Governing for Reform in Aged Care webinar series. This one's called The Role of Governing Bodies in the New Era of Aged Care. My name is Susan Staples and it is my pleasure to be your host today. Before we begin, as always, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians on whose ancestral lands we're meeting today. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on the shores of Birrarung here in Melbourne, and I'd like to make sure we pay our respects to their elders and past, present and emerging, and we acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to country. We also pay respects to the cultural authority of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending from all other areas of Australia today. So getting into our webinar, as I said, it's all about the role of governing bodies in aged care, and adapting to this changing aged care landscape is really fundamental to the role of governing bodies and executives. So we're going to draw on the experiences of our panel, and we're going to focus on the role of boards and executives more so than frontline aspects in governance. And look, we're really wanting to provide a practical understanding of how the role of governing bodies really plays into the new era of aged care. As we know, with ongoing reform and change in the sector, boards do really need to operate in ways that they may not have operated before. What are the skills, the processes, the mechanisms that need to evolve or change to really help boards navigate the environment and ensure that their organisations perform with excellence and operate sustainably? Many organisations have really started this journey already, but in the face of ongoing uncertainty, and we all know how quickly things can change, sometimes new ways of working as a board, can raise questions around how to continue with navigating this change. And some of the questions we're hearing are, with so much to keep on top of, how do we get the comfort that things are actually in order, especially without delving into, the realms of management? What are some of the strategic issues that we might need to consider, and how do we face into those? And what might some of the governance processes need to look like or change when the new Act and the new standards come in? So our panel is going to discuss their experiences as board directors and executives, and look at how they've been supporting decision making to assist them now and into the future from their own organisations. So with that said, I will shortly introduce our panellists, but to give you a heads up on who we have David Martin, Laura-Ann Yen and Paul Ostrowski. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk to them today, and as I said, I'll introduce them more formally in just a moment. But before we get started, I am conscious that a lot of you have joined us for these webinars before. You've been participating in the program for some time, but there might be others who are new. So with the slides on the screen, you will find some more information, as well as a link to sort of explore further details and information about opportunities on how to get involved in parts of the program. Some of the resources that you might want to access are actually directly linked to today's webinar, which will include a podcast, a topic guide and modules, and they are all highlighted on the screen. We're really keen to make this an engaging discussion. So if you'd like to submit a question for the panel, please do so in the question and answer box, which should be on your screen. And we're going to aim to get through as many of those as we can throughout the discussion, just to give everyone a chance to really benefit from their experience. We will be limited by time. We have a hard close at around 1 o'clock. So please join me in welcoming our panellists for today. First of all, we have David Martin. David has been the Deputy Chair of Southern Cross Care, South Australia, Northern Territory and Vic since 2013. Southern Cross Care is a not-for-profit organisation, and it provides aged care and retirement living services, including health and wellness, home care and residential care. David's role, he plays a key role in driving the growth of the organisation across the resi, retirement living and community sectors. David's really passionate about supporting residents and clients to achieve the organisational mission of Better for Life. David is also a former managing partner for Finlaysons, one of Adelaide's oldest and largest legal firms. So obviously bringing a wealth of experience in commercial property and development law to today's topic from a governance perspective. David, it's really great to have you.
Thanks,
Next,
Susan.
we have Laura-Anne Yen. Laura-Anne is the current chair of Goodwin Aged Care Services and has been a member of the board since 2014. So Goodwin is ACT's largest locally based not-for-profit aged care provider. It's owned by members and provides retirement living, resi care, home care, allied health and day clubs. Since being elected to the Goodwin board, Laura-Anne has been a member of the Audit and Risk Committee, chair of the Care and Clinical Governance Committee and chair of the Residents' General Forum. So Laura-Anne's background is in health services, so first as a clinical psychologist and then in executive positions in both Australia and the UK with responsibilities for community health, mental health, rehabilitation and aged care. In her later career, Laura-Anne led a research team at the Primary Care Research Institute at ANU with a focus on chronic illness, and she's also served as a member of the Social Security Appeals Tribunal. So the breadth of her involvement at Goodwin has really given Laura-Anne deep insights into the choices that face seniors, the risks and challenges of providing care and services, and the need for really strong and clear governance. Laura-Anne, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. Lovely to be here.
And just to let people know, Laura-Anne was having some stability issues with her internet, so she has joined us by phone, and we won't necessarily be able to see her, but we'll certainly be able to hear her contributions. So just to let people know if that's wondering why you can't see Laura-Anne.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Laura-Anne. Lastly, we have Paul Ostrowski. So Paul commenced as the CEO at Trobe Community Health Services in 2023. Trobe Community Health is an independent, not-for-profit health service. It provides community-based healthcare, including general practice, nursing, allied health, dental, counselling, psychology, gambling support, alcohol and drug treatment, migrant refugee settlement services, social connection and career support services across Vic, New South Wales and WA. So an incredible breadth of services provided within Paul's remit. Prior to joining La Trobe Community Health, Paul was the CEO at Care Connect and has been active in community aged care services, policy and advocacy for many years. So in his 25 years in the sector, Paul has led and supported organisations in Australia, North America, Asia and Europe, which obviously gives him insights into the strengths and weaknesses of many community care systems. In addition to that, Paul has a Bachelor of Engineering, a Masters of Management, and is a graduate of the AICD. So thank you all very much for joining us today. We're super excited to have you.
Thank you, Susan.
With those wonderful introductions, we're going to dive into the panel Q&A. We've obviously got a few questions already, but we will, as I said, welcome your questions through the chat function. So to set the scene, we're going to start with a bit of a brief overview of where we've come from and the evolution of the role of aged care provider boards, I guess that evolution they've been through, as well as starting to shift our focus to the future. So with that said, I'm going to ask, I think I'll start with David. David, from your experience, as the aged care sector has evolved over the last few years, how have you seen the role of the governing bodies change, and what's the examples that you've got from Southern Cross Care?
Look, in one sense, the role of governing bodies hasn't really changed to the extent that governing bodies have their fundamental roles of setting direction, setting culture, engaging CEOs, monitoring performance, and being responsible for compliance and risk. None of that's new. That's sort of the role of a governing body for pretty much any organisation. I think over a number of years, we're a not-for-profit organisation, and we've seen over many years now that we've transformed from what I'd call a typical not-for-profit board where people were donating their time and whatever skills they could to becoming a very skills-based board. And I think that's one of the things that has really changed over the last several years. The skills that are required on a board are quite extensive, any board. But in the aged care sector, it's become more and more important that we have a range of appropriate skills. And we might talk about those, whether you want to talk about those skill sets now or later. But that, we've evolved into a skills-based board. And the other key thing for me is, although at a high level the role of the board remains pretty much the same, at a detail level, in terms of those performance monitoring and compliance monitoring aspects, those aspects of the role of the board most definitely have changed, particularly in these last few years of change.
Yeah. We do have a question that's come in, and it's asking whether, governing bodies for aged care organisations, is it different to others, and what might those differences be? So, David, quick reflections from you, and then I might pass to Lauren.
Oh, look, I think, a governing body of pretty much any organisation needs to do things like set the strategy, set the culture of an organisation, be, at a high level. These things are pretty common to any organisation. It's in the detail of the monitoring of performance and the monitoring of compliance. That's where the specificity of aged care starts to come in, and that's where your appropriate skill sets become important on a board.
Absolutely. Lauren, I'm aware that you're here but not visible, so I'd love to invite you into this conversation. What are some of your comments?
Thanks, Susan. I think I absolutely agree with David. I think that the core roles of the board are what they have always been. And it is really the assurance that the organisation is functioning well and that it's actually performing according to its values and according to the now increasing numbers of regulations and requirements that are set for us from outside of the organisation. So I think one of the real changes that I see in the boards over the last few years is having to have that triangulated discussion, I guess, so that the board is not just focused on what the Aged Care Act says, but the depth and the specificity of the sorts of requirements that boards need to get over the top of. And I think that poses a challenge, I think, for a skills-based board, and we also have a skills-based board, where it's really crucial that the board is both able to provide the particular and technical skills that come with their area of expertise, but also to be able to engage meaningfully in strategic direction in areas that they may not themselves have a great depth of knowledge and experience in. So somebody who's really engaged in assuring the finances of an organisation may have a very different view of a rights-based service delivery to somebody who is from a human rights background. And so I think the board has a more complex job in some ways than it used to have. And one of the complexities, I think, is in trying to make sure that the sorts of information, the sorts of analysis that are coming to the board are ones that the board can actually use to create that sense of the future direction for the organisation and the performance of the organisation. So I think it's really interesting, but I think it's a really challenging set of roles at the moment for boards, and will be more so, I think, as the new Act comes into place.
Absolutely. And look, I think there's some really great insights in terms of that, the role being the same, but it's actually more complex. Same in terms of objectives, but more complex in terms of how you actually have to get there. And we've got a couple of questions coming through, which I will get to because they're really great questions. But I did want to give Paul an opportunity to jump in. And maybe, Paul, just given your, I guess, your new role as a CEO with La Trobe in the last 12 months, maybe some reflections around the current and emerging challenges that you're seeing boards face, and with that sort of new lens as an executive lens too, really.
I actually think it's been a really interesting journey for boards over the last 5 years in particular. And one of the things that strikes me is I guess our interpretation of those famous governance words, fiduciary duty. And if you go back 5 years, we've always been under enormous financial pressure because we're trying to deliver a service with limited resources. Go back 5 years and we were looking at, okay, how can we actually ensure our services remain financially sort of viable? And there's always a risk in a financially constrained environment that you focus perhaps even too much on that. But a fiduciary duty in the aged care sector is not just a duty to shareholders. It's actually first and foremost a duty to the people that we're actually there to support. We also have a fiduciary duty in a sense to societal expectations. What are Australians looking for in terms of appropriate care for our older citizens? And so I think the way we see fiduciary duty has evolved in a very positive sort of sense, considering sort of the broader stakeholder mix. The other thing that I think we've all seen very concretely, and we've certainly seen it in the home care environment, is the changing clinical complexity of the people that we're seeking to support. More and more, we're hearing, it came out through the Royal Commission, it's coming out through the aged care reforms, people's desire to remain at home, to be able to thrive as long as they possibly can in their community. And as a consequence, we are supporting people who are increasingly clinically complex. And we always knew from demographics that this was coming, and yet in a sense, it's actually happened very, very quickly. And we are all really doing the very best we can to ensure that we have the clinical supports necessary to enable people to thrive while never losing sight of the social supports that enable people to thrive.
Thank you. And I think there's some really nice segues here because there's some great questions which I'd love to pop back to the panel. But look, Paul, I think reflecting on the pace at which things have changed and the complexity which we mentioned before is really, really elevating, I guess, what is expected of boards. And some of the questions that we're getting, one is more practical in terms of how much time do your boards, and this is a question obviously to the three of you, how much time do your boards spend discussing quality compared to financial issues, and how's that changed?
Well, maybe I'm happy to step towards.
Go for it, Paul. Yeah.
Actually, that's really, really interesting, and I think the pendulum has shifted in the last sort of 2 or 3 years. I know in the case of my own board, it's a very significant part of what is talked about. And it's not just the clinical side of it, of quality. It is actually how do the people with their support, how do they respond to our services? So I know my own organisation, Trobe Community Health, is a very heavy investor in gathering information from the people we support, Net Promoter being one of the easiest. But the tool we've engaged to get that feedback, and it comes right into the boardroom, we've invested very significantly. And it's actually quite empowering because you very quickly know what the people you're supporting are looking for and what they like and what they don't like.
Hearing it straight from consumers is a very powerful thing. David, I jumped in before and gave Paul the floor, so I'll hand it back to you.
Oh, look, it's an interesting one. I mean, those of us in the not-for-profit sector know very well the old saying that, look, no margin, no mission. You cannot make a loss because otherwise your business is unsustainable. However, in terms of that, and so therefore, financial sustainability and all of that side of the equation is fundamental. It is so important. However, there is no doubt that we have, we spend at least as much time on issues associated with quality of service, if not more, than we do on what I might call business hygiene related things, because it is how your business remains sustainable is by its reputation, and its reputation for quality and performance. So, and particularly in this, over these last several years of a focus on quality and changing standards and so forth, we've just had to spend so much more time getting our heads around what it means for our business and, importantly, for our customers, for our clients. So, we spend at least an equal amount of time, I suspect more, on quality-related things.
Yeah, great. And I think one of the things that we've talked about in other webinars is that almost we have a tendency to look at things in silos, but the interrelationships are actually really important. So getting that portfolio view and understanding those levers is actually core to that question of sustainability and linking that to good outcomes. So I think, that it is almost that tendency to how do we bring them together rather than keep enough time on the agenda separately. Paul, you said you had something else you wanted to share, but then I'll jump to Laura-Ann for some contributions as well.
Now, I was just reflecting on David's comments about this balance of financial sustainability and the quality of the service we provide to the people we're supporting. And actually, one of the things I think that has occurred as that awareness of that balance, the importance of that balance has grown in recent years, is the maturity of conversations in the boardroom. Because if we were to go back 5 or 6 years, there will have been organisations that said, okay, CEO, what can you cut that will keep us in business? Whereas now the conversation will be, okay, are we actually getting a quality service to the people we're supporting? And are we financially sustainable? And if that's becoming too strong a tension, well, what is the right pathway for us as an organisation? It's not a continue at all costs. It's actually what's our responsibility as a board in ensuring this service is both a quality service and sustainable. And sometimes that's a partnership discussion.
And changing the questions, I think, is really important. What are the fundamental things that we really want answers to, and focusing on those. Laura-Ann, aware that you haven't really had a chance to contribute to this one. Have you got anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah. No, I think one of the things that I observe is that over the years that I've been on the board at Goodwin, is that the appetite at the board has actually changed, I think, very substantially, from being one where the fiduciary responsibilities of the board were very clearly the topic on which we spent a lot of our time. So that was both the current performance and the strategies and the developmental sort of issues that will come up in terms of determining how it is that we would approach our next developments. And I think what's changed is really having to delve down a lot more deeply into what do we mean by wanting to create the best outcomes for people possible. So really having to be much more thoughtful about the range and style of activities that we're actually going to be engaged in, and how we actually marry those sorts of elements into the business elements of the organisation. And, we're really serious about making sure the business works, because without that, then we don't have anything. But we also won't have anything unless we have, as I think David was saying, the good reputation to back up the business behind us.
Yeah. And there's a lot for boards and executives to be juggling, and the pressure does feel real. And it's a bit of a segue into another question, which I think is a really important one, because we may be experiencing some of this across the sector. The question is, does the panel have any suggestions or recommendations on how to engage with a governing body who's disengaged from the service and their governance responsibilities as a governing body? So those who are almost a bit of paralysis in terms of what this means and backing away from some of those challenges. Has the panel got any advice or thoughts on that one?
I'm happy to come in there, Susan.
Thanks, Laura-Ann.
It's a question that came up a little bit further on in the set of issues that we were looking at, and it's really the relationship between the executive and the board, because the executive has a very powerful role, I think, to be able to play in bringing to the attention of the board the sorts of issues and considerations and thoughts and discussions that will enable the board to see a different path for themselves. That, because I think often boards with very strong skills-based may feel as though their skill-based doesn't necessarily set them up to have those sorts of discussions. So I think that it's the stories of our clients, whether they're residents or retirement living or home care clients, and their feedback to the people who are seeing them and to the management team and then through them to the board, that actually begins to encourage a board to be braver about taking on some of the soft issues, I guess, of governance, because we have had to focus, I think, quite a lot on the harder issues, and we're really being pushed into, I think, a much more focused look at the personal quality of the care that we're providing to people in whatever way. So my feeling is that the thing that really gets our board interested, I think, is the stories. It's actually understanding what life is like for people.
Yeah, so really trying to go back to the reason that people joined the board in the first place, to provide, oversight over the quality of care, rather than getting caught up in, and I know it feels like that's a bit flippant to say, caught up in some of the reforms and the obligations, because they do exist. However, it's, let's ask ourselves why we're here and really go back to that North Star. Paul or David, any additional thoughts from you on that one?
I'm happy to have a go.
Sorry,
we're so keen.
Go.
If I can, I think this issue is right at the crux of what we need to be about as a governing body, and that one of the fundamental issues that a governing body is responsible for is the culture of an organisation. And I know just from our perspective at Southern Cross Care, we have had, as a board, we adopted an approach or a philosophy many years ago now of better for life. That is what our entire organisation is built upon and focusing on. So it is a philosophy that pervades right from the boardroom through to the aged care facility floor, and it drives everything that we do. So that issue of being able to establish and work with and have I'll call it a laser like focus on what we're on about, has been very, very critical to us. And whilst exactly how we've done that has varied during this era of significant change, fundamentally the focus hasn't changed, and it is something that has driven everybody in the boardroom from the moment they step into the boardroom, and it pervades right through the organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, anything further from you?
I think my enthusiasm was only really going to support exactly the comments that David and Lauren have made.
Right.
I think it actually comes back to the statement you made, Susan, about our why and the purpose of an organisation. And our own purpose statement here at La Trobe is enabling people to thrive in their communities through quality care, support, education and connection. And do we really believe that? And then finding a way to bring our clients into the boardroom. And I can remember a situation recently for ourselves. We were coming through a strategy process, and getting our client voice represented by clients into the boardroom and watching all the directors sit up and lean in and get completely engaged in the conversation. I think there's something profoundly important in doing that.
And I think just from my perspective, thinking back to the question is, what can you practically do about this is, there does need to be potentially a workshop or a strategy or a strategy day where you can actually sit in the room and sort of say, look, yes, there is a lot happening, this is why we exist. We're here to provide, a better life or, improve the experience of ageing. What are the opportunities around doing that and really buying into the positive story of the reforms and what they're trying to do, with the compliance aspects there to really provide the safeguard and the rails. So they need to be discussed. But it sounds like when a governing body is potentially disengaging, that they're actually feeling overwhelmed by some of the weight of some of the obligations. But to everyone's point, those obligations are there to fundamentally drive what we want to do anyway, which is provide good care. So how do we balance those and really trying to bring people back on board? And, if there is a question about people feeling that they're not up for the job, that's a really difficult conversation, but it's probably an important one for boards to be having, particularly with, facilitated by the chair, for example. Great. I know we've had a couple of questions and then we've got a few prepared questions around information and skills. And I want to turn our minds to that a little bit because, as I said in the introduction, we often hear from boards that there is a lot. There's a lot of issues. There's a lot of information to be across. It can create a sense of concern. And, a lot of boards are sort of saying, well, how do we get across all of that without dipping into management? And I guess my question might be, what are some of the practical things and ways that you've seen help boards get the information that they need? And maybe David, I'll start with you.
Look, boards need a lot of information, and we're getting it. At times we feel like we're being bombarded with information and change, but we need it. And it's one of the reasons why the obligations of a board have expanded and board members have expanded over a period of time. But in terms of how we get the information that we need, we try and do that in a variety of different ways. For example, we try and get appropriate information internally, and although this may not be typical of how a lot of boards work, we at every board meeting we start off and we have our in-camera sessions. In-camera sessions are critical, and we must have those. But then, for the balance of our board meetings, we actually have the whole of our exec team sit in on the whole of the board meetings. So we have our CEO and I think it's 5 members of our senior exec team who sit in with us. Now, we find that creates everybody's on the same page in terms of this culture that leads to a better for life outcome. So everybody's talking the same language. Everybody can hear what each other are saying, apart from the in-camera session, of course. But apart from that, everybody can hear. So everybody is on the same page. So that's how we get some really good, valid, internal and consistent input. But we also, ensure that we get external input. Once every quarter, we ensure that we have a presentation that comes into our boardroom by an external presenter and it can be all sorts of things. We can range from the practical financial performance stuff that somebody like Grant Corduroy can give, or we look at things in relation to, for example, we had Point Heard come in and talk about consumer advisory groups and lived experience and how we can do that better and better. We have, some more out there thinking in terms of creating blue zones with, people enabling people to live exceptional lives and a range of different things. So we make sure that every quarter we get an external input, so we're not just regurgitating stuff that we present or that we gather from ourselves. We have our members of our exec team and also, not always, but occasionally members of the board attending various conferences to make sure that we're being open to things. We encourage people to do things like listen to webinars and participate in things like that. And, you know, we once a quarter, we make sure that we have our board meetings at one of our residential care sites so that we, you know, and we have a tour of the site. We have lunch, often with residents, not always, but, you know, so that we can see it in action. We know what we're talking about. We're still working. You know, we get information from our residential and community care advisory groups and our quality care advisory groups. You know, that process is evolving. And so, look, there's a raft of different ways, but they're just some of the things that we use.
Yeah, great. There's a question here around, you know, models of subcommittees and reporting, and especially around the Quality Care Advisory Committee and what you want to receive, which, excuse me, links to one of our pre-prepared questions around what types of supports and subcommittees can boards use. Excuse me. Lauren, I might ask you to do that one while I have a glass of water.
Okay. Take a little bit of care. That was interesting listening to David, because I think the really trying to draw information in from a whole variety of diverse sources, I think, is a really crucial part of understanding where the business needs to go to. And the committees, of course, are another really important way of trying to treat some subjects in the depth that they need. So certainly some of the compliance areas really need people to be absolutely fundamentally informed about, you know, exactly where we are on things. And it's a good one we have that both for care and clinical governance as well as for the range of other things that you would expect us to have. And the QCAB and the CAB are a really interesting mixture, because it's taken us a little while to work out how we actually integrate the information that those bodies come up with, along with the care and clinical governance and the other formal mechanism that we have, which is our Residents' General Forum. And I think it's still an area where I think we need to do some more work, and I'm, you know, looking forward to doing it, because I think each of those bodies has got a very different approach to the information that we get. But in the end, we have to find a way of bringing that all together, because that's then the thing that informs what our next steps might be, or what the changes might be that we need to do, or what investment we might need to make. And it's very interesting. It's a really interesting thing to see the different approaches of the residents who come to a variety of different meetings and mechanisms within the organisation. Because some, of course, are very interested in the personal issues for them, and some are interested in much more value-laden issues for the whole of the organisation. And so I think, you know, how do we draw together that information is something that I think probably has to be done all the time, because different information comes up at different times. Like David was saying, our executive comes to our board meetings and remains, except for any in-camera sessions. But I think we are, I think, striving to find the best balance between the information that staff bring, so bringing in information that actually informs us about new models of dementia care, or two of our team have just been to France to Lundays, and it's triggered such a depth of discussion, I think, in the board that it makes me really encouraged to think about maybe we need more of that as well. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we're not paying too little attention to the hard yards in the actual business sense of the organisation. So I'll leave it there, Susan, because I think Paul might have things to say as well.
Yeah, and I will ask Paul in a moment. Just excuse me. One of the things I was reflecting on those that you were speaking, Lauren, is that, and to your point too, David, as there is, when there's an environment of a lot of uncertainty, there probably is a tendency for boards to ask more questions and get more detail. And I think for me, what you've both talked about is ways that you can build trust between that relationship between the executive and the board, because that will then enable you to step back and ask fewer questions and sort of that process evolves over time, particularly when there's uncertainty. Yes, we're going to ask more. We're feeling unsure. As we get more comfortable with the information, we know what we're getting. I think that tendency to go into management would diminish. But Paul, over to you, particularly around some of the support that executive teams can give to boards, and maybe some of the questions that you think boards should be asking of the executive team.
Thanks, Susan. If I can build on both Lauranne's and David's comments about having the executive team in the board meeting too, I think it's a fantastic one. The board should absolutely have more lenses on the organisation than just the lens of the CEO, but it also gives directors a chance to assess live how the leadership culture is working. So when a question is asked of a leadership team member, do they glance across to the CEO first, or they just step right towards the question? There could be an interesting reading of the dynamic of how that leadership team is working, just in the body language sort of there. Also, that comment on the breadth of the information that's coming to boards too. So I think that executive teams do have a role to ensure absolute transparency, but also to help draw board attention to the issues that they're really wrestling with. I've seen organisations that get all the board pack, all the information, and then in the meeting, there's the question to the CEO, help me understand the top 3 things or top 5 things that are most significant for you at the moment. What's happening in this month? And getting a leadership response directly to that, and they can feel the way that question has been responded to. The last element, though, is to really not let ourselves get snowed by the information, because in an effort to really master a service, to understand what's going on with all the incidents, etc., I have seen boards go to an extent where their packs become hundreds and hundreds of pages. And we could lull ourselves into a false security that is, all the information's there, we've got a really good handle on the service. Whereas I would argue, actually, it's probably the reverse. If there is so much information that it is snowing directors, then being able to understand the real themes, the things that are really going on, actually becomes quite hard. So I think there is a discipline for both boards and executive to try to continually work to keep the packages reasonable and to make sure the data that's presenting is trend data on what's actually going on in the service.
Yeah, and we see that a lot in work that we do. It's, reports are often a lot of data, but they're not really information. It might be data on specific points rather than functions or systems. So I think there's also that that tendency to sort of say, well, we've got, this is the what, and you give the board the what, but actually where's the so what? And I think that's really important. And then the now what. So what are we doing about it? And I think that question around, what are the top 3 things that are really on your mind is a great question for boards to be asking, to really get to the crux of, what's sort of happening, how well an organisation's responding. I think, some great advice there.
And I think, if I could just add, just to touch on there, those things will change over time. And I think one of the things that we find really helpful is when there's been that opportunity for some analysis. So yes, you need the raw data, yes, you need the trending data, and yes, you need the, what's keeping you awake at night. But you also then need management to do their job, which is to be thinking about, so what do we do with this? Because our job might be to guide a direction, but we're not going to be doing the analysis. And so it's really important, I think, that management takes on that next step in terms of management of the data and the preparation of the data for the board. Thanks, Susan.
And Susan, can I just add?
Thanks, Lauren.
Can I just add my support to what Paul and Lauren have just said? Data, it's part and parcel of our lives now, and it's part of this new era or this new age or era in aged care. Is the amount of data that we are collecting and how we have systems to collect it, record it, keep it safe, of course, and then importantly to analyse it, and the way it's reported to boards is critical. We've been going through quite a period of time of trying to rationalise the amount of data coming to our board so that it becomes far more meaningful and digestible, you know, rather than just receive an enormous amount of data, because you can, you know, look at a lot of data and then just say, well, what's this telling me? You know, please help the board analyse this from your function. And, you know, we've been doing a lot of work on that and getting a lot more dashboard type reporting. And that's taken quite a commitment from the team to get to that state.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing here a lot of that in the work that we do too, David, that sort of tendency and you know, progression towards dashboard reporting. Boards really asking for the analysis. Like, as I said, what's the so what of all of this? Why are you telling me? What do I need to be worried about? What support do you need within the business to help address whatever challenges are being discussed, or opportunities? You know, where are the opportunities for us in this environment? It's actually a nice segue. We're going to talk a little bit about change and potentially a future focus, or shift a little bit more to the future. We've all kind of, I guess, heard the phrase that change is the only constant, and I think no more so than in the aged care sector at the moment, because of the volume and the pace at which things are changing, or changing from happening really quickly to not happening at all. So for the change for the board itself is one thing, and the board's role in change within an organisation is another. Sometimes we feel like the board's ability to change might be a little bit hard, or it's a bit not a priority, maybe not sure what needs to change. But I'm keen to hear from the panel about how you think boards need to adapt to the new environment, particularly within the context of the new Act and the new standards, and maybe sort of reflecting on what we said earlier around that person-centred approach, and the shift that might mean from a traditional view that a board has had. Can I throw to Paul?
Yeah, I think well, one of the things that occurred to me while you were speaking, or preparing to ask the question, Susan, is the nature of organisational strategy, and the fact that strategy these days is far more of a moving feast than it ever was before. We may have a 3 or 5 year strategy, but if it's not being really reviewed at least every year, then the chances of it being fit for purpose diminish sort of very, very quickly. And I think in considering strategy, boards often feel like, oh, that's our responsibility. You know, it's a board responsibility. It's a board responsibility to enable a good strategy and to authorise a good strategy. But that doesn't mean the directors need to be doing it all. And in fact, I would say that the role of the board is to encourage engagement with the right stakeholders so that management can help build strategic options and make recommendations to the board. And my own organisation has really recently gone through a strategy review, and there was a great deal of discipline in making sure we absolutely had client voice present in it. We engaged with staff across the organisation because they are dealing with the client challenges and the client opportunities every day. Board directors were there themselves, other external stakeholders, and what the community that we're operating in needs, and bringing all those elements into the mix. And I would challenge boards, when you're going through a strategy process, to really check off, do we actually have all those stakeholders in that mix, and are we considering all elements?
Thanks. Lauren, anything from you in terms of, you know, where you think the board's role is going to evolve, and particularly within the context of change?
The things that come to my mind, I think, are having a very deep respect for the skills that exist on the board, because they're so fundamental, I think, to creating a solid base for the organisation. But also encouraging directors to be broad in the way that they understand the business, so that we're taking on board not just the compliance or conformance issues, but that the board can be encouraged to bring those skills and their knowledge of the organisation to help them, because I think now strategy for an organisation, now an aged care organisation, is necessarily, I think, a partnership between the management and executive and the board, because that it is so complex, and it is management who knows what needs to be done to meet many of these requirements. And I agree with Paul that the board needs to be able to authorise that and to shape that in line with the values of the organisation and the culture of the organisation. So I think for the board, it's going to be challenging, I think, for directors to bring together their skills but also their commitment, I think, to better aged care in the future. And for some directors, I think it's having very strong regulations and boundaries is probably challenging, because I think it creates a sense of a narrow track. But in fact, the demands of the sector are so great, and the changes that people are asking us to make in the quality of life and provision of the quality of life for our customers means that all of us have to think very broadly, and we have to just be open and trusting, I think, in each other and in our teams. And I think I agree with Paul, we have to look very widely for our stakeholders to make sure that we're getting the right information in to make the right decisions.
Yeah. I'm conscious that we're heading towards the end of the hour, and I did want to try and squeeze a couple more questions in before we have final reflections from the panellists. It talks a little bit to what we've mentioned in terms of the increasing, I guess, feeling of obligation and in some instances potentially obligations under the new act, and does that pave way for a question from the audience? Does that pave way for sort of remuneration of directors? And maybe that's a short answer if we've got one, but I know that's a topic that's certainly coming up a lot more, particularly for not-for-profits who don't generally have remunerated directors. But any quick thoughts from the panel? Paul? Yeah, then David.
So my last two chief executive roles have both been with organisations that are not-for-profit in their tax status, but both organisations pay a reasonable stipend, I suppose you could call it, to directors. And I say reasonable, it's certainly not in commercial terms, like we may be used to in publicly quoted organisations, but it's significant just the same. And I'm actually a supporter of it. I'm a supporter for a couple of reasons, but perhaps the most important is I have absolutely no concerns whatsoever in calling on individual directors or the board collectively to lean into significant issues, even where that may take very significant time. And in a volunteer board, whilst I've got no question at all, volunteers will do their very best, there is just something psychological about asking volunteers to give more and give more and give more. Whereas a remunerated board, I have no concerns whatsoever in doing that. So I do see some advantages in that trend.
Thanks, Paul. David, you had your hand up.
Look, Paul's, I think, stolen the thunder. I agree with what he has said. And look, our board, the members of our board do receive a fee. Once again, it's not, I wouldn't call it a commercial based rate, but it does create that sense of obligation. And, the amount of time that we're asking our board members to commit, and the times at which we're asking them to commit their time demands this kind of professionalism now. It's not, attend a board meeting after you've finished your day job, or if it fits in with your day job. It's no, this is when we're having a board meeting and you're expected to be there. And then there are subcommittee commitments that board members are, our board members, most of them are attend at least 2 subcommittee meetings, which are usually monthly, sometimes quarterly. But and then there are out of hours type of commitments as well to various attendances at sites and functions and so forth. So look, we're asking a lot more of board members now, and we do pay our board members so that we can expect that kind of commitment from them.
Yep. Thank you. Again, conscious of time, and I wanted to give people an opportunity to give their final reflections. And I will start with you, Laura-Ann, and potentially you could answer that question if you wanted to around remuneration as part of your wrap-up. But what are the three sort of most practical things that boards and executive teams really need to consider, particularly as we go into this new era of reform or of regulation?
I think the remuneration issue is one for each organisation, but we are increasingly asking for skills-based, and skills-based means currency, and currency usually means pretty close attachment to the workforce. So I think there are, relativities there that we need to take into account, and Goodwin pays a stipend to the board members, and I think that's a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. Practical things for going forward, I think it's maintaining the sense of interest and engagement and pleasure in doing something that's so important, I think, for our communities. And we're at a point, I think, in aged care development where there's an enormous job ahead of the sector. And so the practical things, I think, are take a speed reading course and make sure that you're talking to everybody on your board so that you've got a real sense of where people's interests and skills and knowledge lie, and get to know your executive team. So I think that would be the other thing that I would do, and get to know your residents and consumers.
Yeah, thank you, Laura-Ann. David?
Look, a few things. I'll come back to culture. I think, culture always is important. It is going to become even more and more important as we go forward. And in this era of change, I've in talking to various people in the sector, sometimes I think people have sort of got a bit of change fatigue, of course, and some people have either resented or even resisted some levels of change. I think the appropriate culture says, no, we embrace the change. It's an opportunity to ensure that our approach to getting better and better and better and being better is alive and well. So we have endeavoured to ensure that our organisation has a culture all the way through of embracing change, and not just compliance with mandated changes, but in the time left after looking after those mandated changes, we're trying to look for other innovative ways to be better and better. So that's one thing. The other thing, and perhaps we haven't spoken a lot about it today, is the approach to our staff. Staffing in going forward is, I don't need to tell anybody listening about the challenges of staff. So they are so critical. They are, we say, as critical as our customers, because without our staff, we're not going to have any customers or clients. So an approach to looking after your staff, valuing them, and letting them know how much difference they make is critical. And we've got to get better and better and better at that. And the other piece has also been sort of alluded to earlier, is about how we get better and better at listening to our consumers, and how we are able to take that voice on board.
Thank you. Paul, quickly from you.
I'd probably finish, Susan, where I started, and that's with the old governance phrase, fiduciary duty, and just saying that in aged care, it's a different set of stakeholders that we owe a duty of good faith or care to, and certainly shareholders. But at the end of the day, if we focus on the older people that we're here to support and getting their voices so we understand what they're looking for and enabling them to thrive, it's very hard to go wrong.
Thank you. And I think, in the practicality of all of that, there is, what does that look like? And, you can go to the board papers, you can go to the information that's been prepared, how you structure your agenda, engaging the board in different ways, building trust between the executive and the board as change happens, because it will continue to happen. So really having that, and we've talked about that sort of open and collaborative relationship and engaging with everybody. I know it does take a lot of time. So it's a really important role, and I think one that we're not shy of, particularly when we do go back to that North Star. Look, we've had a lot of amazing questions in the Q&A, and I'm really sorry we couldn't get to all of them. If we'd had a bit longer, maybe a couple of hours, we could have addressed a whole lot of really important and deeper issues. But hopefully what we've been able to share has been really helpful and insightful. Thank you for joining us. There is an email coming with a link for you to get feedback or to provide us with feedback. And it is really important to us. So I would very much appreciate you hearing from you. If you want to view more information about the program or access any of the learning materials, there is a link on the screen. So please access those in your own time, and they'll also be in the reminder email for the event. And please share any post-webinar content and video with your network. The recording will be made available through the Commission. I want to thank the panellists, Paul, David and Lauranne, very much for your excellent contributions. And yeah, thank you everybody who's joined us today. We'll see you next time.